Why did they always notice her boots first? The heavy thud of black combat soles echoed against the cracked concrete of Lincoln High's parking lot as stepped down from the bus. The sound carried farther than she wanted, bouncing off the rows of parked cars, as if announcing her arrival before she had taken 10 steps. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. 1,000 little judgments ignited all at once. It wasn't the first time people had stared, but today, the weight of it pressed down harder. Camouflage draped across her small frame like borrowed armor, sleeves rolled too many times to reveal trembling hands that gave away what her eyes refused to. The jacket was oversized, carrying the faint smell of a cologne that belonged to a man who no longer came home. The whispers began before she even reached the steps. "Is she serious?" one voice hissed. "She's wearing that to school," another scoffed. Madison Tor's perfect hair, designer jacket, queen of every hallway she entered, let out a laugh that cut through the air. Loud, performed. It was the kind of laugh that invited others to join in, the kind that wasn't meant to be funny but final. Phones were already out, screens lit up, a picture snapped, a caption written. "Wannabe soldier girl. G.I. Jane. Identity crisis." It spread like wildfire, moving faster than next step. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't stop walking. The football team had already spotted her, a cluster of Letterman jackets leaning against their trucks like kings holding court. Jake, quarterback, broad-shouldered, grinning, fell in behind her. His voice boomed like a drill sergeant, mocking in cadence. "Left, right, left." His friends saluted dramatically, the laughter of a dozen teenagers slicing through her composure. Each laugh was a needle, each look a reminder of her place. But her spine stayed straight, her eyes fixed ahead. She had learned, painfully and permanently, that giving them a reaction only gave them more power. Still, her fingers trembled. The jacket was too heavy, the day too long already. Inside the building, the wave followed her. Hallways turned into gauntlets. Theater kids ducked behind lockers, shouting, "Incoming," with exaggerated explosions. Even seniors, who never noticed anyone beneath them, lifted phones to record the spectacle of the girl in camouflage. Her locker waited halfway down the most crowded hallway. Of course it did. Life had a way of choosing the angles. She reached it and froze. A note was taped across the metal door. "G.I. Jane, WNTS attention." The handwriting messy, anonymous, but the cruelty was clear enough. She ripped it down with too much force, crumpling it into her palm until her knuckles whitened. Behind her, footsteps slowed, voices lowered to whispers. She knew they were watching. She knew they always were. Her lock spun beneath damp fingers. The numbers blurred. Tears threatened, but she forced them back. Weakness was ammunition, and she couldn't afford to give them more. "Nice costume," a voice said. She turned. Stood behind her, a girl she'd shared a PE class with, someone who seemed less cruel than most. But even her voice carried that tilt of amusement, that need to categorize, to understand. "Is this for a project or something?" Shoved her books into her backpack, kept her voice low. "Something like that." She didn't explain. How could she? The truth wasn't something she could hand over in a hallway, not the reason she wore it, not the date marked in her heart like a scar. She caught her reflection in the mirror hanging inside her locker. Dog tags hung beneath her collar, the metal cool against her skin. For a moment in that reflection, she saw her father standing behind her, broad shoulders, warm eyes, his hand resting on hers. His voice whispering the words she missed most. "Stand tall, be proud." But when she blinked, it was only her. A girl in a uniform too big, in a school too small to understand. By third period, the cruelty had sharpened. Chemistry class had once been safe. Numbers and formulas always gave answers, even when life didn't. But today, even the back row couldn't protect her. Tyler Brooks, chaos wrapped in a Letterman jacket, circled her desk with deliberate precision. His elbow swept across her table. Textbooks crashed to the floor. Oops, he grinned. Sorry about that explosion. His hands mimicked fireballs. Boom, kaboom. The class erupted, suppressed laughter at first, then bolder, louder free. Mrs. scribbled equations on the board, oblivious. His hands shook as she picked up her books, the sleeves of her father's jacket catching on the edges, clumsy and humiliating. Careful there, soldier. Tyler leaned close, his whisper just loud enough for the nearest Rose to hear. Wouldn't want you calling in and on the lab. The snickers spread, each one a blade. Her fists tightened until her knuckles showed through pale skin. Every muscle screamed to fight back, to stand up, to give him something sharp enough to cut his laughter in half. But she stayed silent, because silence was survival. By lunch, survival had become exhaustion. The cafeteria was enemy ground. Always loud, always crowded, always divided by invisible borders. Kept her head down, tray in hand, moving toward the corner table farthest from the noise. For a moment she thought she might make it. A sandwich, a corner, solitude. Then Madison Torres arrived. Her entourage flanked her, perfect hair swinging, nails tapping on the plastic tray. The cafeteria quieted as if someone had dimmed the volume. Madison slid into the seat across from without invitation. "We get it," Madison began, voice soft but sharp. "You're trying to be edgy, but the whole costume thing, kind of old." Laughter flickered across the tables nearby. Phones rose into hands, waiting, recording. Brittany leaned in. "There are so many cute boutiques in town, we could take you shopping." Martinez added with a tilt of her head. "You're making everyone uncomfortable. It's like you're trying too hard." Gripped her fork so tightly it bent. The cafeteria was silent now, the kind of silence that feeds on anticipation. 100 pairs of eyes, 100 waiting mouths. She rose to her feet, chair scraping against the floor. Her eyes locked on Madison, and for the first time that day, her voice carried more than defense. It carried warning. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Madison smirked, though it faltered for the briefest second. Then confidence returned, fueled by the crowd. "Oh, please, what are you going to do? Call your daddy to come save you?" The words hit like shrapnel. Time froze. The cafeteria inhaled as one. Opened her mouth. She would answer. She would say the words she'd buried for 3 years. But before her voice broke through, the world itself interrupted. A sound, a rumble at first, then a roar. A noise too large to belong in a school cafeteria. Windows rattled, trays clattered. Students ducked instinctively. The sound grew until it filled every chest, every breath. Madison's smirk shattered. "What the hell is that?" Outside, shadows swept across the sunlit glass. A massive silhouette circled above. The cafeteria erupted, not with laughter this time, but panic, awe, disbelief. Phones aimed skyward. A Black Hawk helicopter descended over Lincoln High. And she knew the markings, the reason, the truth that had been waiting for this exact day. Her father's shadow had returned. What makes a building tremble? Fear, or the sound of a machine built for war. The cafeteria shook as the Black Hawk thundered overhead, its blades cutting through the sky like a storm. Students screamed, chairs toppled, trays clattered to the ground. But no one left their spot at the windows. Faces pressed to the glass, phones held high, desperate to capture proof of something their minds hadn't yet accepted. Didn't move. She couldn't. Her hands were frozen around the edge of the table, knuckles white, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She knew that aircraft, knew the unit markings painted in sharp black across its hull, knew exactly who was inside. This wasn't coincidence. It wasn't a drill. It was her father's shadow arriving in steel and noise and rotor wash. The helicopter banked sharply, circling once around the school. The force of its descent rattled lockers, knocked books off shelves in classrooms. Teachers shouted instructions no one followed. The entire building emptied toward exits, A flood of teenagers chasing spectacle, forgetting order. Phones caught it all, screens glowed, social media swelled. But stayed where she was, staring at the shadow outside, her breath shallow and uneven. The football field became the landing zone. The Black Hawk descended, rotors blasting wind across the bleachers. Grass bent flat beneath the power of its downdraft. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, pulling every student toward the field as if gravity itself had shifted. Figures stepped out, dress uniforms, polished shoes, brass catching sunlight. Even from inside, even through the chaos, saw her, Colonel Sarah Mitchell. The sight knocked the air from her lungs. Colonel Mitchell had stood on her porch 3 years ago. She had delivered the folded flag. She had spoken the words no child should ever hear. Your father did not make it home. And now she was here, at Lincoln High. The intercom crackled to life. Principal Williams' voice, tight, uncertain, almost trembling. Attention, students and faculty, we have an unusual situation. Please report to the main office immediately. I repeat, to the main office. Her name hit the crowd like a spark in dry grass. Heads turned, mouths whispered. The girl in camouflage, the one they mocked at breakfast, the one who ate alone. She felt their eyes on her as she rose. Every step through the cafeteria felt like moving through water, slow, heavy, endless. Her boots, once ridiculed, now struck the linoleum with an unfamiliar weight. Purpose. The crowd parted. Students pressed themselves against lockers to let her pass. Phones filmed, whispers spread, but no one laughed. Not anymore. Her heart ached as she walked. For 3 years she had carried silence, worn the uniform in private, in mourning. And now her secret, her grief, was dragged into daylight. She wanted to vanish. She wanted to keep walking until the ground opened and swallowed her whole. But something deeper pulled her forward, something older, a promise made to a man whose cologne still lingered in her jacket. Stand tall. Teachers spilled into the hallways, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Even the cynical ones, the ones who had taught for decades and claimed to have seen everything, stood still in doorways as passed. And still, the sound of the helicopter's rotors beat against the windows like a second heartbeat. Outside, the entire student body gathered around the football field. 2,000 people, buzzing with awe and speculation. What's happening? Why is the military here? Did she do something? Madison and her entourage pushed through the crowd, but their confidence was gone. Madison's perfect posture had collapsed into something smaller, paler. The words she had thrown in the cafeteria, "Call your daddy to come save you," echoed in her mind like poison. Beside her, Tyler Brooks looked sick, his face drained of all color. His explosion jokes, his mockery, suddenly tasted like ash in his mouth. But didn't look at them. She kept her eyes forward as she walked toward the main office, each step heavier than the last. Through the office window she saw her, Colonel Mitchell, straight-backed, silver hair tucked under her cap, chest decorated with decades of service. She hadn't changed. The same eyes that had once looked at with quiet pity now watched her with something different, respect. The door opened. 2 junior officers stepped forward, polished shoes clicking in rhythm against the tile floor. They flanked without a word, guiding her through the corridor that led outside. And then the world opened. The football field stretched before her, sunlight spilling across a sea of faces. 2,000 eyes turned as one. The Black Hawk sat silent now, rotors slowing, its presence massive, undeniable. Soldiers stood in formation near the 50-yard line, uniforms immaculate, brass gleaming in the afternoon sun. A living curtain of students parted as walked the concrete path toward the field. Her combat boots clicked against the ground, no longer a source of mockery but of meaning. Whispers followed her. That's her. The girl in the uniform. Why are they here for her? She didn't answer them, couldn't. Her throat was tight, her chest heavy. The jacket weighed more now than it had that morning, as though her father himself leaned on her shoulders, reminding her of the promise he left her with. Don't let them forget who we are. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. The microphone crackled in her hand. The crowd hushed as if the air itself had been pulled still. 3 years ago today, she began, her voice steady, rich with authority. Staff Sergeant David made the ultimate sacrifice while serving his country in Afghanistan. The field gasped in unison, closed her eyes, fighting the sting in them. She had heard this story before, too many times, but never like this. Never with 2,000 voices falling silent around her. Colonel Mitchell continued. She spoke of convoy ambushes, of communications established under fire, of 12 lives saved because of one man's choice to step into danger. Her father's story, laid bare to the people who had mocked her only hours before, stood beside the colonel, tears streaming freely now. She did not wipe them away. Let them see, she thought. Let them finally understand. Her father's dog tags pressed heavy against her chest, warmed by the sun, by memory, by grief that had never softened. The colonel's voice grew louder, carrying across the field. His daughter has honored his memory every year on this date by wearing his uniform, not for attention, not for recognition, but because love is louder than silence and sacrifice must never be forgotten. The crowd didn't breathe. The air hung with reverence. A presentation case opened, a folded flag placed in trembling hands, and then the medal. The Medal of Honor, glowing in sunlight, the weight of a nation's highest recognition. The colonel's hand pinned it to her father's uniform, just above her heart. She leaned in, voice soft for alone. He would be proud of the woman you're becoming. His courage lives on in you. For the first time in 3 years, let herself believe it. The crowd erupted in applause, not shallow clapping, but reverent, breaking like a wave. Teachers wiped tears. Students who had never thought of sacrifice suddenly understood it in flesh and blood. And in the middle of it all stood a 17-year-old girl who had walked into school mocked and alone, but now carried the silence of a soldier on her shoulders. Not as costume, not as joke, but as truth. What do you do when the world finally sees you, but only because of your pain? The football field was still trembling from the applause when silence crept back in, heavier than before. The Medal of Honor gleamed against his chest, pinned awkwardly but deliberately to her father's jacket. The folded flag weighed down her arms like a living thing, fragile yet immovable, as if the fabric itself carried every ounce of sacrifice it represented. The helicopter remained in the background, its rotors ticking down like the heartbeat of a giant. The students who had rushed out for spectacle stood frozen now, pinned by a truth none of them had been prepared to witness. For 3 years had carried grief in private, in bedrooms, in quiet anniversaries, in nights where she pressed the jacket against her face and inhaled the fatting scent of her father. Now that grief stood exposed before 2,000 people. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing naked in the middle of a storm. She looked across the sea of faces. Some were wet with tears, others were blank, overwhelmed, unable to process, and some were turned inward, weighed down by guilt. Madison Torres had not moved since the moment Colonel Mitchell spoke her father's name. Her perfect posture had collapsed, shoulders slumped, arms crossed, lips parted in silence. The cafeteria queen looked smaller now, like a child standing in front of something she could neither control nor dismiss. Beside her, Brittany and shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the ground, to their phones, to anything that was. But there was nowhere to hide. The truth was too large. And Tyler Brooks, the joker, the boy who had mimed explosions in chemistry class, stood with both hands covering his face. His shoulders shook. When he finally lowered them, his eyes were red, swollen. His gaze passed over them, but she didn't stop. She couldn't, she wasn't ready. Colonel Mitchell stepped back, microphone lowered. Her job here was complete. The ceremony had spoken louder than any lesson, and now the silence belonged to. But didn't speak, she didn't need to. The crowd began to shift, breaking into murmurs, whispers, apologies whispered too late. Teachers placed hands on students' shoulders, guiding them back, urging order. But no one left quickly. They lingered, reluctant to move, as if movement would shatter the fragile reverence that still hung over the field. Remained at the center, clutching the folded flag to her chest. Her breathing was uneven. Her hands trembled. She thought she should feel proud. She thought she should feel vindicated. But instead she felt exposed. Because respect that came only after spectacle wasn't respect at all. It was awe. It was pity. It was too much too late. The helicopter's crew moved with silent precision, preparing for departure. His heart squeezed at the sight. Part of her wanted to run to them, to climb inside, to escape this field, this school, this unbearable spotlight. But her feet stayed rooted. A voice came from the crowd, small, shaky. She turned. Tyler stood only a few steps away now, his face streaked with tears. He looked broken in a way she hadn't thought him capable of. His usual smirk was gone, his swagger gone, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar: regret. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. His words were clumsy, tripping over themselves. "Your dad, he was a real hero. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The apology trembled in the air, fragile, desperate. Students turned to watch. Teachers paused. Looked at him for a long time. The boy who had kicked her pencil, who had laughed at her sleeves, who had called her soldier like a joke. She could still feel the sting of humiliation. And yet, in this moment, he was not the bully from chemistry class. He was just a boy, 17, realizing for the first time that words could wound in ways deeper than fists. "He was," said quietly, just 2 words, but they carried more weight than anything she had spoken all day. Tyler swallowed hard, nodded, and stepped back. Then Madison came forward. Her friends hung back, uncertain, unwilling to share in what they knew was coming. For the first time in years, Madison walked alone. Her heels clicked softly against the concrete, a sound smaller than it had ever been. She stopped in front of, her lips parted, but no sound came. She tried again. The word broke off. She shook her head, looked down, then forced her eyes up to meet. "I said terrible things, about your dad, about you. I didn't know." His voice was steady when it came. Not angry, not vengeful, just tired. "You didn't ask." The words sank into the field like stones dropped into water. Simple, but undeniable. "You saw someone different and decided that made them a target," continued, her voice softer now. "Maybe next time you'll think about what you don't know before you decide to hurt someone." Madison's mascara ran. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but nothing came. She turned and walked back to the crowd, her confidence shattered, her crown gone. The field remained quiet. Stood alone again, the flag heavy in her arms, the metal gleaming against her chest. The applause had ended. The apologies had been spoken. But the silence that remained was the truest part of all. It was the silence of realization. That every person carries a story. That grief walks the halls unnoticed until it's forced into light. That mockery, so easy in a crowd, can break against the truth of sacrifice. The Black Hawk's engines whined, blades beginning to spin once more. The soldiers saluted, precise and silent. Colonel Mitchell placed a hand briefly on shoulder, her eyes saying what words could not: "You are not alone in this." And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the helicopter rose. Wind whipped across the field, lifting hair, tugging at jackets, forcing students to shield their eyes. The roar filled every corner of the school grounds, drowning out thought, drowning out whispers. His hair whipped around her face. She held the flag tight, as if it might be pulled from her. She watched the Black Hawk rise, climb, and vanish into the horizon. When the sound faded, the silence left behind felt eternal. She stood in the middle of the field long after the crowd had begun to disperse. Long after students shuffled back to classrooms that no longer mattered. long after teachers whispered about what lesson plans could possibly follow such a day. She stood because she couldn't move, because her father's presence felt stronger here now than it had in 3 years, because part of her still hoped that if she waited long enough, he would step off the helicopter and walk across the grass. But he didn't. And so she stood, holding the flag, holding the medal, holding the weight of being seen. For the first time, not as a joke, not as a target, but as something no one could laugh at again. How do you go home after a day when the world finally learns your secret? The ride back was quiet. The bus that usually roared with chatter and music was subdued, filled with the hum of whispers too low to make out. Phones stayed in hands, screens glowing as messages and videos flew across invisible networks. Clips of the helicopter landing, screenshots of in uniform with the flag pressed against her chest, snippets of Colonel Mitchell's speech. She could feel their eyes on her, not mocking now, not dismissive, but curious, cautious, heavy with something she couldn't quite name: respect, pity, awe. She hated it. The weight of the folded flag sat across her lap. The medal still pinned above her heart felt like fire against her skin. For years, these things had been hidden in boxes, guarded in silence. Now they were broadcast on every screen in town. When the bus hissed to a stop at her corner, no one spoke. A few eyes followed her as she rose, combat boots thudding against the aisle. She kept her chin high, even as her stomach churned. The air outside was cooler, quieter, almost kind. Her house was small, the paint fading on the siding, the porch light broken even though it was only late afternoon. Robert's old sedan sat in the driveway. Her mother's car was gone. The stillness was too familiar. She let herself in, dropping her bag by the door. For a long time she just stood in the living room, the folded flag still in her hands. The house smelled faintly of coffee and dust, the way it always did. Pictures lined the mantel, her father in uniform, smiling. Her parents together, arms wrapped around each other before Afghanistan. A younger on his shoulders, laughing before she understood what sacrifice meant. Her knees buckled, and she lowered herself to the couch. The silence of the house wrapped around her, thick and unyielding. She unclipped the medal with shaking fingers, setting it gently on the coffee table. The ribbon unfurled, the metal disc catching the light like something too sacred to touch. She laid the folded flag beside it. Together, they seemed to fill the room, commanding attention the way her father once had just by walking into a space. Her throat tightened. She thought of Colonel Mitchell's words. He would be proud of the woman you're becoming. But would he, she wondered. Would he be proud of the girl who let herself be mocked in silence instead of fighting back? Proud of the daughter who carried grief quietly instead of speaking truth sooner? Proud of the young woman who sometimes resented the very uniform she wore because of the weight it carried? Her fists clenched against her knees. Pride and guilt twisted inside her until she couldn't tell one from the other. The sound of the front door opening startled her. Robert stepped in, jacket slung over one shoulder, tie loosened. He froze when he saw the medal and flag laid out, then shifted awkwardly, his voice gentle. "They came today, didn't they?" Nodded, unable to speak. He set his jacket down, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and sat across from her. He wasn't unkind. He had never been unkind. But he carried himself like a man constantly careful not to intrude on someone else's grief. "I saw the videos," he said softly. "The whole town's talking about it." Pressed her lips together. "I didn't ask for this." "I know." She lifted her eyes to him, searching. "Then why does it feel like I'm supposed to do something with it? Like it isn't enough to just remember him?" Robert sighed, leaning forward. "Because people don't understand what remembering really means. They think it's a flag and a speech, but you know better." The words sat heavy between them. He meant them kindly, but they didn't make the weight easier. Her mother came home later, carrying grocery bags in both arms. She nearly dropped them when she saw the medal. Her breath caught, and for a long time she just stood in the doorway, eyes brimming. "They finally gave it to us," she whispered. Rose, helping her set the bags down, then stood beside her as they both looked at the table. "I thought they'd mail it," her mother admitted, her voice trembling. "Or maybe call us in for some ceremony at the base. I never imagined," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Never like this." Swallowed, everyone knows now. Her mother turned, eyes sharp despite the tears. "Do you regret it, wearing his uniform?" Hesitated. The question pierced deeper than she wanted. She thought of the laughter, the stares, the note on her locker. Then she thought of the silence on the field, the weight of the flag, the applause that hadn't been mockery but reverence. "No," she said finally. Her voice cracked, but she forced the word through. "No, I don't." Her mother's shoulders eased. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his face, the gesture tender but fragile, as if afraid the girl in front of her might break at a touch. "You remind me of him," she whispered, "too proud to ask for comfort even when you need it." The truth of it hit hard. She looked away, blinking fast, unwilling to let her tears spill again so soon. That night the medal stayed on the table. The flag stayed folded neatly beside it. Sat in the living room long after her mother went to bed, staring at both until the shadows deepened and the house grew still. Her phone buzzed relentlessly on the cushion beside her. Messages, apologies, classmates she had barely spoken to, suddenly desperate to say they were sorry or that they respected her now or that they hadn't really meant it when they laughed. She ignored everyone. Because respect given only after spectacle was not respect. It was fear of being wrong. It was guilt trying to scrub itself clean. And guilt wasn't friendship. She pressed the phone face down into the couch and leaned back, closing her eyes. Her father's voice rose in her memory again, soft but unyielding. "Stand tall, be proud." The words had once felt like armor. Tonight they felt like chains. Because standing tall meant being seen. And being seen meant carrying a weight she wasn't sure she was strong enough to hold forever. The house was quiet. The metal glowed faintly in the dim light. The jacket still clung to her shoulders, smelling of cologne and loss. And sat there in silence, torn between the pride of his legacy and the exhaustion of her own. What changes in a school overnight? The walls, the halls, or only the way people look at you? When walked through the doors the next morning, it was not laughter that greeted her, not whispers sharp with cruelty, not phones lifted to capture her like a sideshow. It was silence, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, heavy, stretched too tight. Students froze mid-conversation when she passed. Lockers remained half open, textbooks forgotten, words stuck in throats. No one laughed at her boots this time. No one mocked the camouflage draped across her shoulders. Instead, they stepped aside. The same crowd that had jeered yesterday now made way as if she carried something fragile and sacred. She felt it in the way they looked at her, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, shoulders hunched as if standing near her carried risk. Respect, pity, fear, she couldn't tell which weighed heavier. And she hated every one of them. Her boots echoed down the hallway, too loud, too final. The uniform no longer smelled of her father's cologne, but of yesterday's dust, sunlight, and the crushing weight of 2,000 eyes. At her locker, another note waited. Her stomach twisted before she even touched it, bracing for cruelty. But the words were different now. "We're sorry." 2 words. No name. No handwriting to blame. Just a shaky apology taped to the same metal door where G.I. Jane wants attention had mocked her 24 hours earlier. She crumpled it in her fist, not out of rage but exhaustion. Apologies written in ink were too easy, too cheap. When she looked up, stood nearby, shifting nervously. She offered a small smile, hesitant, almost afraid. "Hey," said softly, I mean yesterday." Cut her off with a shake of her head. "Don't, please." His mouth closed, her apology swallowed before it could escape. She stepped back, letting pass. In chemistry class, Tyler Brooks didn't sit in his usual seat. Instead, he hovered awkwardly near the back until the last possible moment, finally sliding into a chair 2 rows away from. His notebook remained closed. His usual chatter died on his tongue. When Mrs. began writing equations on the board, Tyler's hand went up. The class turned. Surprised, Tyler never volunteered answers. "Mrs.," he said, voice tight, can I say something before we start?" The teacher froze, marker in hand. "If it's appropriate." Tyler turned. His eyes landed on, then swept the room. "I was a jerk yesterday," he began. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and forced it steady. "I thought it was funny, making jokes, acting like it was all a game, but I didn't know, I didn't understand, and now I just want to say I'm sorry, and to anyone else I ever made feel small." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. Mrs. Marker squeaked back onto the board, but her voice was softer than usual. "Thank you, Tyler. Now, page 172. Stared down at her desk. Her hands shook. She wanted to disappear. Because public apologies weren't for her. They were for the people making them. A way to cleanse guilt in front of an audience. A way to say, "Look at me, I'm different now." But forgiveness couldn't be performed like theater. Forgiveness was private, and she wasn't ready. By lunch, the air was unbearable. Madison Torres waited near the cafeteria entrance, arms folded, surrounded not by her usual entourage but by silence. Brittany and hovered a few steps back, unsure whether to stand with her or abandon her completely. Tried to slip past, tray in hand, aiming for her corner table, but Madison stepped forward. Her name fell heavy, stripped of arrogance. Madison's eyes were rimmed red, makeup imperfect, as though last night had stolen her sleep. "I need to." "Don't," said, her voice sharper than she intended. But Madison didn't stop. "I was cruel. I said things I can't take back. Her voice cracked. She inhaled. "You don't have to forgive me, but I need you to know I regret it." The cafeteria was listening, of course. Phones tilted subtly in hands, recording the reversal of power. The Queen of Lincoln High stripped down to trembling apologies before the girl she had mocked. Stomach twisted, none of it felt real. "You didn't care about me yesterday," she said flatly. "You just cared that I didn't fit." Madison swallowed, lips trembling. "You're right." Shook her head, stepping past her. "Then don't pretend this is about me now." The cafeteria held its breath. Madison stood frozen, unable to chase, unable to answer. Brittany and exchanged looks, uncertainty, maybe even fear, and drifted back. Sat alone again. The corner table felt both safer and heavier, because being feared was not the same as being understood. Her phone buzzed again, dozens of new messages. From strangers, "Your dad was a hero." From classmates, "We respect you now." From Madison herself, "Please let me make it right." Turned the phone face down and ate in silence. That night at home, she lay in bed staring at the medal on her desk. The ribbon glowed faintly in the lamplight, but to her it looked less like honor and more like weight. She remembered the football field, the applause, the tears, the way the crowd parted as she walked. And she remembered her father's voice in memory, "Stand tall, be proud." But she also remembered the laughter, the jeers, the words taped to her locker, and she wondered if the helicopter hadn't come, if Colonel Mitchell hadn't spoken, would anything have changed? Would she still be mocked tomorrow, dismissed as a costume, written off as a girl who didn't belong? Her chest ached at the answer. Because the truth wasn't that people had changed. The truth was that people had been forced to see her. And she knew, deep down, that respect forced into being never lasted long. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it came with dreams of her father. He stood on the football field, smiling, alive, his uniform neat, his hand on her shoulder. But every time she tried to speak, his image dissolved into dust. She woke before dawn, her pillow damp, her chest tight. And for the first time since the Black Hawk landed, she wondered whether carrying his memory so publicly was strength, or just another way to break herself apart. What happens when a private grief becomes public property? By Thursday morning, the story had left the walls of Lincoln High. It began with shaky phone videos uploaded before the end of the day, clips of the Black Hawk circling above the cafeteria, the landing on the football field, Colonel Mitchell's voice, clear through the microphone. 3 years ago today, Staff Sergeant David made the ultimate sacrifice. The internet did what it always did, it spread. By nightfall, the video had been viewed tens of thousands of times. By morning, it had reached local news stations. And by the weekend, it wasn't just Lincoln High whispering about the girl in camouflage. It was the entire town. When stepped off the bus that morning, reporters were waiting at the corner across from the school parking lot. Their cameras perched on shoulders, microphones angled like weapons. How does it feel to know your father was awarded the Medal of Honor? Did you expect the helicopter? Are you planning to enlist after graduation? She froze at the sight of them, her stomach twisting. Their voices blurred into static. Their faces became a wall. She lowered her head, pushed through the crowd of classmates who stared with as much curiosity as the reporters. She had wanted her father remembered. She had never wanted to be a headline. Inside, the school buzzed. Hallways were plastered with printed screenshots of her standing beside Colonel Mitchell, the folded flag in her arms. Someone had even turned it into the cover of the school newspaper, bold letters stretched above her picture. Hero's daughter. Ripped one down as she passed. The paper crumpled in her hands, useless against the fire in her chest. In first period, Mrs. offered her the front seat, as if proximity to authority might protect her. Students avoided staring openly, but their eyes flickered constantly, curious, cautious, reverent. "Do you want to say anything?" Mrs. asked gently before beginning the lesson. Shook her head. Her voice was gone, trapped beneath the weight of 2,000 expectations. At lunch, things grew worse. A television crew had parked outside, their equipment crowding the sidewalk. Through the cafeteria windows, students watched the reporters film live segments about the girl who honored her fallen father. The words made skin crawl. She sat alone again, tray untouched, while whispers pulsed around the room. Not mockery this time, but speculation, gossip, fascination. "Do you think she'll get a scholarship now? Maybe she'll meet the president. Bet she'll be in the news all week." She wanted to slam her fists against the table, to shout that her father's death was not a spectacle, not entertainment. But instead she sat still, fork clenched in her hand, jaw tight. Because the louder the world grew, the quieter she felt. That night, her mother stood in the kitchen with the evening news playing on the small TV by the counter. His face filled the screen. Grainy footage of her clutching the flag replayed with a somber. Lincoln High School witnessed an extraordinary moment this week, as the daughter of Medal of Honor recipient Staff Sergeant David was honored on the football field. Her mother's eyes glistened. She pressed a hand against her mouth, whispering he would be so proud. But turned away. "Would he," she asked, her voice breaking, "or would he hate that I've become this?" Her mother blinked. "What do you mean?" His chest tightened. A headline, a symbol, something for people to talk about until the next tragedy comes along. They don't care about him, not really. They care about the story. Her mother's face softened. She set down the dish towel, stepping closer. Stories are how people remember. Without stories, memories fade. Shook her head, tears stinging. "But it's not their memory, it's mine." She fled to her room before her mother could answer. The medal sat on her desk, gleaming in the lamplight. The folded flag remained on her dresser, heavy with presents. She stared at them until her chest ached. Her phone buzzed again. Messages poured in from numbers she didn't recognize. Veterans thanking her, students apologizing, news anchors requesting interviews. She ignored them all, because none of them understood. They saw only the uniform, the medal, the helicopter. They didn't see the nights she lay awake, clinging to the jacket that smelled of him. They didn't see the silence at the dinner table when her mother couldn't speak his name. They didn't see the years of walking through school hallways invisible until suddenly she was unforgettable. The attention felt like theft. The next morning, Principal Williams stopped her in the hall. His tie was crooked, his eyes weary from endless calls with the media. He said carefully, "The district wants to hold an assembly tomorrow, to recognize you, to honor your father publicly." Stomach turned, "No." His brows furrowed. "I understand how difficult this must be, but—" "No," she said again, sharper this time. "He already had his ceremony. He had it 3 years ago. You weren't there. None of them were, but I was, and I don't need another one." Principal Williams hesitated, caught between duty and decency. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll tell them." But she knew he wouldn't. By the end of the day, posters were already being hung, honoring our hero. Friday, main gym. Her classmates whispered about it, eager for another performance, another moment of spectacle. Ripped one down as she left. The paper tore easily, but the anger didn't fade. That night she dreamed of her father again, but this time when she reached for him, he turned away. She called out, begged him to look back, but he kept walking into a fog she couldn't cross. She woke with tears soaking her pillow, chest heaving, the metal burning like fire on her desk. For the first time since the helicopter landed, she wished she had never worn the jacket. Because she hadn't honored him, she had turned him into a stage. What happens when silence breaks, not because you want to speak, but because you can't hold it in anymore? Friday came like a storm she couldn't outrun. By morning, the school was buzzing. The gym had been transformed overnight, rows of folding chairs, flags draped across the walls, a stage erected with a podium. The posters plastered in the hall screamed the same words over and over. Honoring our hero. Students treated it like an event. Teachers whispered about it like an obligation. Reporters gathered at the front doors with cameras and notepads. But for it felt like a funeral replayed, except this time the body being lowered wasn't her father's. It was her own. She tried to escape, tried to convince herself she could fake sick, stay home, let the assembly happen without her. But when she pulled the covers that morning, her mother's voice came through the door. "You can't run from this." Her throat burned. "Why not? I didn't ask for it." "No," her mother said softly, "but sometimes we don't choose the weight we carry. We just decide how to carry it." The words cut deeper than she wanted them to. She rose, dressed slowly, clipped the medal back onto her father's uniform. Each motion felt like betrayal to him, to herself. At school, she was escorted into the gym by Principal Williams and 2 faculty members, as though she were fragile, breakable. Students filled the bleachers, buzzing with anticipation, their phones hidden but waiting. Colonel Mitchell wasn't there this time. No helicopter thundered outside. This was smaller, cheaper, an imitation of something sacred. The mayor spoke first, his voice rehearsed, too smooth. He talked of sacrifice, of courage, of pride. He spoke of her father's legacy as though reading from a pamphlet. The crowd clapped politely. Then Principal Williams spoke, his words nervous but careful. "Today, we honor Staff Sergeant David and the strength his daughter has shown in carrying his memory." Applause swelled, phones lifted, face burned. When they motioned her to the podium, her legs refused to move. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes, the Medal of Honor cold against her chest, the folded flag heavy in her arms. She didn't want this. She wanted her father back. She wanted silence. She wanted the jacket to be hers alone again, not a costume for strangers to photograph. But the gym waited, and sometimes silence breaks whether you want it to or not. She walked slowly to the podium, each step echoing against the gym floor. The microphone loomed, its static sharp in the air. For a moment she said nothing. The crowd fidgeted, phones tilted, anticipation thick. Then she inhaled. "You think you know me now," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the gym. "You think you know my father, but you don't." The room froze. You see the uniform, the medal, the helicopter. You see a headline, but you don't see what came before. You don't see the nights I sat awake waiting for a door that would never open. You don't see my mom crying in the kitchen because she couldn't say his name without breaking. You don't see the empty chair at every birthday, every holiday, every day that was supposed to be normal. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself forward. You didn't see me yesterday morning, walking through this school while you laughed, while you pointed, while you made me a joke because I dared to remember him in the only way I knew how. Whispers rippled across the gym, sharp and guilty. Madison shifted in her seat, eyes dropping. Tyler's jaw clenched. You didn't care about me then. You cared about entertainment, about fitting in, about making sure no one saw how small you really felt inside. And then, when the helicopter came, when the truth landed in front of you, suddenly I wasn't a joke anymore. Suddenly I was sacred. She paused, scanning the crowd, her eyes blazing. But that's not respect. That's fear. That's guilt. That's you realizing too late that the person you mocked was carrying something you couldn't understand, and maybe you never will. The silence in the gym was suffocating now. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. Principal Williams swallowed hard. "My father didn't die so you could clap at an assembly," said, her voice cracking but strong. "He died because he believed in protecting the people next to him. He died because he believed some things were worth more than his own life. And if you want to honor him, if you really want to honor him, then stop waiting for helicopters to land before you treat people with dignity. Stop needing medals and ceremonies to remind you that every person walking these halls is carrying something you can't see." Her chest heaved. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice a whisper that filled the gym. "My father was a hero, but I'm not. I'm just his daughter, and all I ever wanted was to remember him without being turned into your story." She stepped back. The silence stretched, deeper than any applause could reach. And then slowly someone began to clap. Not polite, not obligatory, genuine, raw, a teacher in the back row, palms striking together with steady rhythm. Another joined, and another. But this time the applause didn't feel like spectacle. It wasn't about helicopters or medals. It was about truth. About the rawness of her voice, the courage it took to say what no one else could. Stood still, flag in her arms, uniform heavy on her shoulders. The applause rolled over her, but she didn't smile. She didn't bow. Because she hadn't spoken for them. She had spoken for him and for herself. What do you do after you've spoken the truth, and the world has finally gone quiet? The gym emptied slowly that Friday afternoon, but stayed. She remained on the stage long after the applause faded, long after the last student shuffled out. The folded flag sat against her chest. The medal gleamed faintly in the overhead lights. She wasn't sure if she felt lighter or heavier. Principal Williams approached, hesitant. His tie was askew again, his face pale with uncertainty. He said softly, "You didn't have to say all that." "Yes," she replied quietly, "I did." He nodded, swallowed hard, and left her alone. By the time she stepped outside, the sun had already begun to set. Reporters waited near the gate, microphones eager, cameras hungry, but walked past them without a glance, her boots steady, her silence sharper than any word she could offer. She walked home instead of taking the bus. The cool autumn air wrapped around her. Leaves crunched underfoot. For the first time all week, she let herself breathe without the weight of 2,000 eyes pressing down. Her house looked smaller than usual. Dim light spilled from the living room window. Inside, her mother sat on the couch, Robert beside her. They rose when entered, their eyes searching her face. "How did it go?" her mother asked carefully. set the flag and medal on the table, then sank into the armchair. "I told them the truth," she said. Her mother tilted her head and exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. "And now it's done." They didn't press her. They didn't need to. That night the medal stayed on the table again. But this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like what it was always meant to be, a reminder. Not of the noise, not of the spectacle, but of a man who chose others over himself. Sleep came easier. Her dreams were gentler. She saw her father again, but not on the battlefield, not in dust or shadow. He was at their kitchen table, sipping coffee, smiling softly. And this time, when she called to him, he turned. He looked at her. He nodded. The next morning, walked to school without the uniform. Jeans, a simple sweater, sneakers. Her father's jacket remained folded on her bed, resting with the medal and flag. For the first time, she realized she didn't need to wear it to feel him close. He was there regardless. The silence at school lingered, but it had shifted. It wasn't pity anymore. It wasn't spectacle. It was respect, quiet, tentative, imperfect, but real. No one laughed. No one mocked. Some nodded as she passed. Others stepped aside, not in fear, but in recognition. Madison didn't approach her again. Neither did Tyler. But their eyes carried something different now, not guilt, not desperation, but humility. And maybe that was enough. By lunch, found waiting at her usual table. She wasn't flanked by friends, wasn't holding her phone, wasn't performing. She just sat, tray in front of her, looking nervous. "Can I sit with you?" she asked softly. Studied her for a long moment, then she nodded. They ate in silence at first, but it was a comfortable silence, not the suffocating kind. Slowly, words came. Small things, homework, teachers, music. For the first time in months, felt something she hadn't expected to, normal. That evening after school, walked to the football field alone. The bleachers were empty. The grass bent softly in the wind. She stood at the 50-yard line where the Black Hawk had touched down, where the ceremony had unfolded. The memory of that moment pressed against her, but it didn't crush her this time. She looked up at the sky, orange with sunset, and whispered into the air. "I did it, Dad. I remembered you. I made them remember too." Her voice cracked, but she smiled through it. The wind stirred, cool and gentle like an answer. For the first time, realized she didn't have to choose between silence and spectacle. She could carry her father quietly, in her own way, without letting the world steal him from her. She didn't need assemblies. She didn't need applause. She just needed to keep walking in the boots he left her, steady and proud. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Whispers still lingered. Reporters still tried to chase the story, but learned to tune them out. She learned to hold the memory of her father closer than the noise of the world. Sometimes she wore the uniform, sometimes she didn't. But every time she touched the fabric, every time she felt the weight of the dog tags, she remembered, dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't demand. It endures. And as she walked home from the field that night, her boots steady on the concrete, she carried that truth with her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.